figurative meaning of this poem, the first stanza can be translated as childhood because it's happy and the mood is joyful. So it could be talking about like Christmas time or something. And the second stanza it talks about wedding bells. So it's obviously about marriage and it has a romantic feel to it. And that could be about his love life. And the third stanza talks about possibly war because the alarum bells, which can be defined as a call to arms. And then Poe did enlist in the army when he was a young adult. And the third stanza also deals with hardships in his life. And the fourth stanza is about death. Line 72, it says, "What a world of solemn thought their melody compels." That could be talking about maybe a disease. The ringing could be signaling to death because the churches used to play bells when someone would die. So that is overall the figurative meaning of the poem relates back to Edgar Allan Poe's life. And Alex will discuss the Gothic and Romantic elements of the poem.
Okay, so for the Gothic and Romantic elements within this poem, for Gothic, there's a metonymy of gloom and horror with the moans and groans of bells. Edgar Allan Poe gives a description of the bells at the end of each stanza, and as it progresses, it gets darker for the omens that would be going on with his life. It's shown at the end through the line, the tolling and moaning of the bells. These examples would help the author show and exemplify his points and actually express what he's trying to say within the poem. The Gothic elements of the work, they symbolize death and sadness, and the Romantic elements, they allow the poem to have a lighter, an uplifting side before it gets to the depressing Gothic points. Romantic element examples. In the first two stanzas, it's a lot more happy. They have jingling and tinkling of the bells and rhyming and chiming of the bells. And then eventually it talks about rapture in line 30, and it's an ecstatic emotion, a powerful love.
Then we had to find 3 to 5 poetic elements and examples of them, and how they're effective and how they relate to the whole meaning of the work. And then we had to find 3 to 5 literary elements and examples and how they're effective and relate to the whole meaning of the work. For metaphor, we figured out that the whole poem was a metaphor and that the bells represent the different stages of life. This was effective in the way that it gave a different view on life. The rhyme scheme was effective because it gave emphasis on specific words, as it shows which words are important within this piece of work. Some examples of the rhyme scheme, we have whenever Poe basically rhymes bells with a different word throughout the whole thing. And then metonymy, we had metonymy of gloom, with gloom and horror, as Alex mentioned in the last section. This metonymy is effective because gloom and horror into the poem in an effective way. The moaning and groaning of the bells, this relates to the whole meaning of the work in the way that he's showing that there is definitely gloom and horror towards the end of the poem. 3 to 5 literary elements. For anaphora, we have the bells, which are the stages of life, and they're effective because they start the tone of each stanza. They relate to the whole meaning of the work, showing that there are these 4 different sections of life. For parallelism, we have towards the end of the poem where Poe keeps bringing up these lines such as "to the throbbing of the bells, to the sobbing of the bells, to the rolling of the bells, and to the tolling of the bells." And they are effective because they show this gloominess within the bells at the end of the poem, and they relate to the whole meaning of the work, showing that the bells are very gloomsome at the end of the poem. Poe uses diction that's very happy and light, and that shows a time of happiness, such as childhood, and of marriage. But then towards the end of the poem, it becomes very gloomy diction, and this is effective because it shows this happiness going into gloominess. And now I'll pass it over to Mark. as he explains the word selection and author's choice.
Word selection and author's choice. Appreciation of the ways in which language and how it shapes the meaning in the poem. His language. He uses his words to describe a happy feeling in the beginning. It turns gloomy, and it shows how his life starts great and always ends terrible. Basically, by his word choice, he's showing how in the beginning everything is great, everything is grand. Through the changing of the bells, he's showing how it gets harsher and life isn't as great as it was in the beginning. Appreciation of structure and how it shapes meaning in the poem. He keeps the same rhythm throughout the poem, even though at some points it seems that he's just getting repetitive. The lines just have the same rhythm over and over again, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Because he keeps the same rhythm, it kind of shows you that it's the same person's life, because it's always the same rhythm. It's just changing the words and the mood. And appreciation of style and how it shapes the meaning of the poem. Style is that it starts happy and then turns into a gloomy tone again, reinforcing this idea of life starting happy and ending poorly. And then appreciation of technique and how it shaped the meaning of the poem. He uses his repetition a lot.